The transport ship shuddered as it entered the atmosphere of Kepler 442b, its hull groaning under the stress of atmospheric entry. Inside the cramped passenger bay, 37 cadets from various species across the Galactic Coalition sat strapped to their seats, each lost in their own thoughts about what awaited them at the prestigious Nexus Military Academy. Marcus Chun pressed his face against the small porthole, watching alien landscapes roll beneath them. At 19, he was one of the youngest humans ever accepted into the Academy, a fact that had earned him both admiration and skepticism from his peers back on Earth. The Coalition had only recently accepted humanity as a member species, and many still viewed them as primitive newcomers to galactic civilization. First time off-world, human. The voice belonged to Zethkar, a 7-foot-tall Crothery whose scales shimmered with an iridescent blue-green pattern. His species had been warriors for millennia, serving as the Coalition's primary military force before humanity's arrival. Marcus nodded, trying to hide his nervousness. Yeah, Earth's gravity is about 20% higher than here, so this should be interesting. The Crothery's laugh was a series of clicking sounds. Gravity is the least of your concerns, soft skin. Wait until you meet the validation beast. Several other cadets perked up at this mention, and Marcus noticed a change in atmosphere immediately. Even the usually confident Valdorian twins exchanged worried glances, their crystalline skin dimming slightly. "What's a validation beast?" Marcus asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know. A new voice answered from across the aisle. It belonged to Kira Thane, a Tyrellian whose moth-like antennae twitched constantly as she spoke. Her species was known for their intelligence and served primarily in research and tactical positions. It's an ancient tradition at Nexus Academy. They use a creature called a Fenrax to test incoming cadets. The beast can sense fear, aggression, leadership potential, even genetic compatibility for various military roles. Genetic compatibility? Marcus frowned. Each species has different strengths, explained Jorn, one of the Valdorian twins. His voice carried the musical quality typical of his people. Crothery excel in frontline combat, Tyrellians in strategy and intelligence, Valdorians in technical operations and engineering. The Fenrax can identify these traits through scent markers and pheromones. Zethkar leaned forward, his predatory eyes gleaming. The beast has never been wrong in its assessments. It will smell each of us, categorize our potential, and the Academy instructors will use that information to place us in appropriate programs. What happens if it doesn't like what it smells? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Then you go home, Kira said simply. About 15% of cadets are rejected during validation. The Fenrax can sense those who lack the proper temperament for military service. The transport ship touched down with a heavy thud, and the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Attention cadets, we have arrived at Nexus Academy. Please gather your belongings and prepare for disembarkation. Welcome to your new home for the next 4 years, assuming you survive validation." As the cadets filed out of the ship, Marcus got his first look at Nexus Academy. The facility was massive, built into the side of a mountain with gleaming towers and training grounds that stretched for kilometers in every direction. Ships from dozens of worlds sat on various landing pads, and he could see cadets from previous years going through training exercises in the distance. The air smelled different here, cleaner somehow, with an ozone-like quality that made his skin tingle. The gravity was indeed lighter, and he found himself bouncing slightly with each step until he adjusted his gait. "Impressive, isn't it?" said a voice behind him. Marcus turned to see a human woman about his own age with short-cropped auburn hair and sharp green eyes. "I'm Sarah Martinez from the Luna Colony. You must be the Earth cadet I heard about." "Marcus Chun from San Francisco." "How did you know?" Sarah grinned. "You're the only one gawking like it's your first time seeing advanced architecture. The rest of us grew up with this kind of technology." She gestured toward the Academy's towers, which seemed to defy gravity as they spiraled upward in impossible curves. A loud whistle echoed across the landing area, and all conversation stopped. A figure approached them, humanoid, but clearly not human. The being stood nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 arms and skin that looked like polished obsidian. Its voice, when it spoke, carried the authority of absolute command. Cadets, I am Instructor Veltar of the Nexus Academy faculty. You will follow me to the validation chamber. Those of you who pass will be assigned quarters and begin orientation tomorrow. Those who fail will be on the next transport off-world. The instructor's 4 eyes swept across the group. Move. They were led through corridors lined with holographic displays showing the Academy's history, famous graduates, and current cadets in training. Marcus noticed that humans appeared in very few of the images, and those that did seemed to be relegated to support roles rather than combat positions. The validation chamber was a large circular room with smooth walls and a domed ceiling. In the center sat what could only be the Fenrax. The creature was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen or imagined. It was roughly the size of a large horse, but its body plan was completely alien. 6 powerful legs, ending in claws, supported a muscular torso, while its head was elongated with 4 nostrils and 6 eyes arranged in a hexagonal pattern. Most striking were its color-changing fur patterns, which shifted through various hues as the cadets entered. The Fenrax is an apex predator from the world of Gorth Prime, Instructor Veltar explained. For over 1,000 years, they have served as companions to coalition military forces. Their sensory capabilities exceed those of any known species. This particular individual, designated Alpha 7, has evaluated over 10,000 cadets during his service here. Alpha 7's head turned toward the assembled group, and Marcus felt an involuntary shiver run down his spine. The creature's eyes seemed to look through him rather than at him, as if it could see things hidden in his very DNA. You will approach one at a time when your name is called, the instructor continued. Stand before Alpha 7 and remain still while he conducts his evaluation. Do not speak, do not move, and do not attempt to deceive him. He will know. The first cadet called was Zethkar. The proud Crothery strode forward with confidence, his scaled chest puffed out. Alpha 7 rose from his resting position and approached slowly, his nostrils flaring as he took in the Crothery's scent. After a few moments, the beast's fur shifted to a deep red color, and he made a sound like a purr mixed with a growl. Combat specialization, high aggression compatibility, pack follower mentality, Instructor Veltar announced. Approved for Tactical Infantry Program. Zethkar beamed with pride as he was directed to stand with the approved cadets. One by one, the others were called forward. Most were approved with various specializations: intelligence, technical, medical, logistics. A few were rejected, and Marcus watched with sympathy as they were escorted from the chamber, their dreams of military service crushed. When Kirathane was evaluated, Alpha 7's fur turned a brilliant blue, and the instructor nodded with what might have been approval. Intelligence specialization, strategic thinking, leadership potential. Approved for command track. Leadership potential. Marcus had noticed that designation had only been given to 3 cadets so far, all from species with long military traditions. Sarah Martinez, the instructor called. Sarah walked forward with steady confidence. Alpha 7 sniffed her carefully, his fur cycling through several colors before settling on a mixture of green and gold. Technical specialization, moderate leadership potential, innovation indicators. Approved for engineering corps. Finally, Marcus heard his own name called. He stepped forward on somewhat unsteady legs, tried to project confidence he didn't feel. As he approached Alpha 7, he was struck by the creature's size. Up close, the Fenrax was even more imposing, and Marcus could see intelligence gleaming in those alien eyes. The sniffing process seemed to take longer than it had for the others. Alpha 7 circled him slowly, those powerful nostrils working constantly as he analyzed every scent marker Marcus carried. The creature's fur began shifting through colors rapidly: red, blue, green, gold, purple, and others Marcus didn't recognize. Then, something unexpected happened. Alpha 7 stopped moving. His fur went completely white, a color Marcus hadn't seen during any of the previous evaluations. The creature's 6 eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made him want to step back, but he forced himself to remain still. Slowly, deliberately, Alpha 7 lowered his massive head and then his entire body until he was lying down. But he didn't stop there. The powerful predator rolled onto his back, exposing his vulnerable belly, while keeping his eyes locked on Marcus. A gasp went up from the assembled cadets. Even Instructor Veltar stepped forward, his 4 eyes widening in what Marcus assumed was surprise. "That's impossible," whispered Zethkar. "Finrax don't submit to anyone." But Alpha 7 wasn't finished. The creature rolled back to his feet and walked directly to Marcus, close enough that he could feel the alien's breath on his face. Then, to everyone's amazement, Alpha 7 sat down directly in front of the human cadet and spoke in a deep, rumbling voice that somehow Marcus understood despite never having heard the language before. "Pack Alpha found." The chamber erupted in shocked voices from the cadets, but Instructor Veltar raised one of his 4 hands for silence. His expression was unreadable as he stared at the scene before him. In over 10,000 evaluations, the instructor said slowly, "This has never happened. Alpha 7 has identified not just leadership potential, but pack dominance. According to Finrax's instincts, you are not just command material. You are their natural leader." Marcus stared down at the massive creature sitting calmly before him, its white fur now shifting to a deep, respectful gold. He had no idea what this meant for his future at the Academy, but he had the distinct feeling that his life had just become far more complicated. "What does this mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Instructor Veltar was quiet for a long moment before responding. "It means, Cadet Shun, that we may need to completely reconsider humanity's role in the Coalition military. It also means you've just become the most closely watched cadet in Academy history." As Marcus was directed to join the approved cadets, he caught sight of his reflection in the chamber's polished walls. He looked exactly the same as he had that morning. Just a 19-year-old human from Earth who had always dreamed of serving in the military. But the way the other cadets now looked at him, with mixtures of awe, confusion, and in some cases fear, told him that everything had changed. Alpha 7 remained sitting where Marcus had left him, watching the human's every move with those ancient, intelligent eyes. And Marcus had the strangest feeling that this was only the beginning of something much larger than he could possibly understand. 3 weeks had passed since the validation ceremony, and Marcus Chun had learned to sleep with one ear open. Not because he was in any physical danger, quite the opposite, actually. Ever since Alpha 7 had declared him Pack Alpha, the Finrax had appointed himself as Marcus's personal guardian. The massive creature had taken up residence outside Marcus's dormitory room, creating a rather intimidating barrier between the human cadet and anyone who might want to speak with him privately. This morning was no different. Marcus opened his door to find Alpha 7 lying across the threshold, those 6 golden eyes immediately focusing on him with alert attention. The creature's fur was a calm blue-green, indicating contentment, but Marcus had learned that could change in an instant if the Finrax perceived any threat to his chosen leader. "Good morning to you, too," Marcus said softly, scratching behind what he had come to think of as Alpha 7's ears, though the anatomy was quite different from any Earth animal. The Finrax made a pleased rumbling sound and moved aside to let Marcus pass. The corridors of the Academy were busier than usual this morning. Advanced cadets were preparing for field exercises, while the new arrivals like Marcus were still adjusting to the intensive training regimen. As he walked toward the dining hall, Marcus noticed the familiar pattern of behavior that had developed over the past 3 weeks. Other cadets would start to approach him, notice Alpha 7 padding silently behind him, and then quickly find somewhere else to be. Only a few had been brave enough to actually speak with him regularly. Sarah Martinez was one, probably because she was human and felt less intimidated by the Finrax's protective behavior. Kira Thane was another, her scientific curiosity overriding her instinctual caution. Even Zethkar had warmed up to him, Though the proud Crothery clearly struggled with the idea that a member of what he considered an inferior species had been marked as superior leadership material. The dining hall was a massive space designed to accommodate the dietary needs of dozens of different species. Marcus grabbed a tray and loaded it with foods that were both nutritionally appropriate for humans and actually edible by Earth standards, a sometimes challenging combination. He found Sarah and Kira at their usual table in a corner where Alpha 7 could position himself to watch all approaches. "You look tired," Sarah observed as Marcus sat down. "Rough night." Marcus rubbed his eyes. "Couldn't sleep. I keep thinking about what Instructor Veltar said yesterday during tactical analysis." Kira's antennae twitched with interest. "About the field exercise next week? About the unique challenges they're planning for me, specifically." Marcus took a bite of what the replicator insisted was scrambled eggs, though they were purple and tasted vaguely of cinnamon. Every other cadet gets to train with their designated specialization groups. Combat tracks train together, intelligence tracks train together, technical tracks train together. But apparently, I'm getting special individual assessments. That's not necessarily bad, Sarah pointed out. It could mean they're fast-tracking you for advanced leadership roles. Before Marcus could respond, a commotion near the entrance to the dining hall caught their attention. A group of advanced cadets had entered, led by a Crothery who was significantly larger than even Zethkar. This one wore the insignia of a fourth-year student and carried himself with the supreme confidence of someone who had never been challenged. "That's Vextar," Kira whispered. "Fourth year, top of his combat specialization class. He's been asking questions about you." Marcus frowned. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest he doesn't believe a human could possibly deserve the respect Alpha 7 has shown you," Sarah said quietly. "Be careful, Marcus. Crothery culture is built around proving dominance through combat. If he thinks you're unworthy of your position, he might try to challenge you." As if summoned by their conversation, Vextar's group approached their table. The large Crothery scales were displaying the deep red coloration that indicated aggression or challenge, and his eyes were fixed directly on Marcus. "So you're the human that has everyone talking," Vextar said, his voice carrying the clicking undertones that suggested barely controlled hostility. "The soft skin that somehow fooled a Fenrax into thinking he's leadership material." Marcus set down his fork and looked up at the advanced cadet calmly. He had learned from his father, a career military officer, that the worst thing you could do when confronted by a bully was to show fear or back down. "I don't think I fooled anyone." Alpha 7 made his own assessment based on whatever criteria Fenrax used for such things. "Fenrax are predators," Vextar said, stepping closer to the table. "They respect strength, cunning, the ability to lead a hunt, and kill prey. What could a human possibly have that would impress such a creature?" Marcus was about to respond when he felt a familiar presence behind him. Alpha 7 had risen from his resting position and moved to stand directly beside Marcus's chair. The Fenrax's fur was shifting from blue-green to a warning yellow, and his 6 eyes were fixed on Vextar with unmistakable intent. Vextar's scales flickered between red and orange, the colors of challenge and uncertainty. Clearly, he hadn't expected to have to deal with the Fenrax directly. "Your guardian beast doesn't frighten me," Vextar said, though his voice carried a slight tremor that suggested otherwise. Fenrax serve the coalition military. They're not supposed to show favoritism to individual cadets. "Alpha 7 doesn't serve me," Marcus said quietly, placing a gentle hand on the Fenrax's flank. He chose to recognize something. "I'm still trying to figure out what that means myself." This seemed to surprise Vextar. Clearly, he had expected the human to either cower or boast about his special status. Marcus's honest uncertainty was not something the Crothery had prepared for. Before the confrontation could escalate further, another voice cut through the tension. "Cadet Vextar, is there a problem here?" Everyone turned to see Instructor Veltar approaching. The obsidian-skinned instructor's 4 arms were clasped behind his back, and his expression was unreadable, but there was something in his tone that suggested he was not pleased to find advanced cadets intimidating new arrivals. "No problem, sir," Vextar said quickly, his scales shifting to a more neutral brown coloration. Just getting acquainted with the new cadets. I see. Veltar's four eyes moved between Vextar and Marcus, taking an Alpha 7's protective stance and the obvious tension in the air. Cadet Vextar, shouldn't you be preparing for your advanced tactical simulations rather than socializing in the dining hall? Yes, sir. We were just leaving. Vextar turned to go, then paused and looked back at Marcus. We'll continue this conversation later, human. After the advanced cadets left, Instructor Veltar remained standing beside their table. Alpha 7's fur had returned to its calm blue-green, and the Fenrax settled back into his watchful position. Cadet Shun, a word in private, please. Marcus followed the instructor to a quiet corner of the dining hall, Alpha 7 padding along behind them. Veltar studied the human cadet for a long moment before speaking. You handled that well, he said finally. Many new cadets would have either tried to fight or completely back down when confronted by an advanced student like Vextar. My father taught me that there's usually a third option between aggression and submission, Marcus replied. Sometimes it's better to stay calm and see what the other person really wants. Wise advice. However, I should warn you that this incident is likely to repeat itself. News of Alpha 7's unprecedented behavior has spread throughout the Academy. Some see it as a sign of human potential, others as an anomaly that needs to be corrected. Marcus glanced down at Alpha 7, who was watching the conversation with apparent understanding. What do you think, instructor? Veltar's expression was thoughtful. I think that in my 40 years of military service, I have learned to trust the judgment of Fenrax over that of most sentient beings. However, I also think that whatever Alpha 7 recognized in you will need to be proven to others through your actions rather than his protection. What kind of actions? That's what we intend to find out. Your individual assessment next week will be unlike anything any cadet has experienced before. We're designing it specifically to understand what Alpha 7 saw in you and whether it can be developed into effective leadership capabilities. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Can you give me any hints about what to expect? The instructor's laugh was a sound like rocks grinding together. If I told you what to expect, it wouldn't be a very effective assessment, would it? However, I will say this. Prepare to be challenged in ways you haven't anticipated. Physical trials, mental puzzles, ethical dilemmas, and situations that will test not just your abilities, but your character. As they walked back toward the main part of the dining hall, Veltar continued speaking. There's something else you should know, Cadet Shin. Word of Alpha 7's recognition has reached Coalition High Command. There are officials from multiple worlds who are very interested in understanding what this means for humanity's role in galactic military affairs. That sounds ominous. Not ominous, necessarily, but definitely significant. Humans have been junior members of the Coalition for less than a decade. Most species still see Earth as a developing world with primitive technology and limited strategic value. If Alpha 7 is correct about your leadership potential, it could change how humanity is perceived across the galaxy. They had reached Marcus's table, where Sarah and Kira were waiting with obvious curiosity about the private conversation. No pressure, Marcus muttered. Quite the contrary, Veltar said with what might have been amusement. All the pressure. Excellence is forged under pressure, Cadet Shun. We'll discover next week whether you're made of the right material. As the instructor walked away, Sarah leaned across the table. What was that about? Marcus sat down heavily, suddenly, feeling the weight of expectations settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. Apparently, I'm about to become the most tested cadet in Academy history. Alpha 7 moved closer to Marcus's chair, and the human could swear he detected sympathy in those alien eyes. At least he wouldn't be facing whatever was coming alone. But somehow, that thought was both comforting and terrifying at the same time. The assessment chamber was unlike anything Marcus had seen at the Academy. Instead of the clean, technological surfaces he had grown accustomed to, this room was designed to simulate natural environments. Holographic projectors created a dense forest setting, complete with the sounds and smells of an alien wilderness. The air was thick with humidity, and strange calls echoed from creatures hidden in the artificial undergrowth. Marcus stood at the entrance, wearing standard field gear, but feeling anything but standard. Behind him, a group of academy instructors and officials watched from an observation deck that overlooked the chamber. Among them were several beings he didn't recognize, representatives from Coalition High Command who had traveled specifically to witness this unprecedented assessment. "Remember, Cadet Chun," came Instructor Veltar's voice through his communication device. "This is not a pass-or-fail examination. We are here to understand, not to judge. Be yourself, trust your instincts, and let us see what Alpha 7 recognized." The mention of the Fenrax made Marcus look around. Alpha 7 was not with him in the chamber. The first time they had been separated since the validation ceremony 3 weeks ago. Marcus felt strangely vulnerable without his self-appointed guardian nearby. Assessment beginning in 3, 2, 1. The chamber sealed, and Marcus found himself alone in the artificial wilderness. The first challenge came immediately as the ground beneath his feet gave way, dropping him into what appeared to be a natural pit trap. His training kicked in, and he managed to catch himself on the edge, pulling himself back to solid ground with minimal difficulty. But as he dusted himself off, he heard something that made his blood run cold. The unmistakable sound of distress calls. Not from one source, but from multiple directions. Human voices, Crothery clicking, Torellian musical tones, and others he recognized as belonging to his fellow cadets. This wasn't supposed to be a group exercise. Marcus had been told it would be an individual assessment. But the voices were real, and they were clearly in trouble. He moved toward the nearest cry for help, pushing through dense holographic vegetation. What he found was Zethkar, trapped under what appeared to be a fallen log, his scales flashing the orange color of pain and distress. "Marcus, thank the void you're here," the Crothery gasped. "I can't move this thing alone, and I think my leg is broken." Marcus immediately moved to help, but as he reached for the log, a rational part of his mind started asking questions. How had Zethkar ended up in his individual assessment? Why was the Crothery, who was significantly stronger than any human, unable to move the obstacle himself? But the pained clicking sounds Zethkar was making were convincing, and Marcus found himself unable to simply walk away from someone who might be genuinely hurt. He leveraged his position and managed to lift the log enough for Zethkar to pull himself free. "Thank you," Zethkar said, leaning heavily on Marcus's shoulder. "I don't know how I ended up in here. One moment I was in tactical training, the next I was falling through some kind of portal." Marcus helped the Crothery to a safe resting spot, but before he could process what was happening, another cry for help reached his ears. This time it was Sarah's voice, coming from deeper in the forest simulation. He found her trapped in what appeared to be quicksand, sinking slowly but steadily. Again, the logical part of his mind questioned the situation. Quicksand was an extremely rare phenomenon, and the odds of multiple cadets ending up in his individual assessment seemed astronomical. But Sarah's fears seemed genuine, and she was already up to her waist in the treacherous ground. "Don't come closer," she called out. "This stuff is unstable. If you fall in too, we're both dead." Marcus looked around quickly, spotting a fallen branch that might serve as a lever. He extended it towards Sarah, bracing himself carefully to avoid the quicksand while giving her something to grab onto. It took several minutes of careful maneuvering, but he managed to pull her to safety. "How did you get in here?" he asked as she caught her breath. "I have no idea. I was in engineering class, and suddenly everything went black. When I woke up, I was sinking." Sarah looked around the forest simulation with confusion. "This is supposed to be your private assessment, isn't it?" Before Marcus could answer, more distress calls echoed through the artificial wilderness. Kira Thane was calling for help from what sounded like a considerable distance, and there were at least 2 other voices he couldn't immediately identify. A terrible realization began to form in Marcus's mind. This wasn't a malfunction or accident. The assessment was designed to put him in exactly this situation, forced to choose between completing his own objectives and helping others who were in danger. He looked in the direction of Kira's calls, then back at Zethkar and Sarah. The Crothery was still favoring his injured leg, and Sarah was shaken from her experience in the quicksand. If he left them here to help the others, they might face additional dangers. But if he didn't respond to the other distress calls, cadets he considered friends might be seriously hurt. "This is impossible," Sarah said, apparently reaching the same conclusion. "They can't expect you to save everyone, can't they?" Marcus asked quietly. He thought about Alpha 7's recognition, about the phrase Pack Alpha found. In nature, pack leaders didn't abandon any member of their group. They found ways to protect everyone, even when it seemed impossible. He helped Zethkar to his feet, supporting the Crothery's weight on one side while Sarah took the other. "We're going to find the others together." "Marcus, that's not efficient," Sarah protested. "You'll move faster alone, and we're just going to slow you down." "Maybe, but that's not how this works." Marcus had no idea where the certainty in his voice came from, but he felt absolutely sure about his decision. "Either we all make it out, or none of us do." They moved through the forest as a group, with Marcus navigating toward Kira's distress calls while supporting Zethkar and watching for additional hazards. It was slow going, but Marcus found that his mind was working differently than it had during individual challenges. Instead of focusing on his own survival and success, he was thinking tactically about the group's needs and capabilities. When they found Kira, she was trapped on a narrow ledge halfway down what appeared to be a cliff face. Her Turellian physiology wasn't designed for climbing, and her attempts to reach safety had only gotten her more stuck. "Stay back from the edge," Marcus called to her. "We're going to figure this out." He studied the situation carefully. Zethkar was injured and couldn't attempt a rescue climb. Sarah's engineering background might be useful, but she lacked the physical capability for a direct rescue. Marcus himself had some climbing experience from his youth in California, but the artificial cliff face looked treacherous. Then he remembered something from his basic tactics classes. Sometimes the best solution wasn't the most obvious one. "Kira," he called down, "how far does that ledge extend? Can you move along it?" "Maybe 20 meters in both directions," she called back. "But I don't see how that helps." Marcus was already moving, leading the group parallel to the cliff face while staying back from the dangerous edge. His hunch paid off when they discovered that the cliff curved inward, creating a slope that was steep but manageable about 30 meters from Kira's original position. "This way," he directed Kira. "Move carefully along the ledge toward my voice." It took another 20 minutes, but they managed to extract Kira safely. By the time she was back on solid ground, Marcus had heard 2 more distress calls from different directions. "This is insane," Zethkar said, his scales showing exhaustion despite their usual Crothery pride. "How many cadets did they put in here?" "As many as it takes to test what they want to test," Marcus replied. He was beginning to understand the true nature of this assessment. This wasn't about his individual capabilities. It was about whether he could truly function as the Pack Alpha that Alpha 7 had recognized. As they moved toward the next crisis, Marcus found himself developing a system. He assigned roles based on each cadet's capabilities and limitations. Sarah's engineering mind made her excellent at analyzing problems and identifying solutions. Kira's intelligence background helped with tactical planning. Even injured, Zethkar's natural warrior instincts made him valuable for identifying potential threats. By the time they had rescued the 7th cadet, a Valdorian technical specialist who had been trapped in a collapsed shelter, Marcus realized that the individual challenges had stopped appearing. The simulation had become entirely about group dynamics and collective problem-solving. The final challenge came as they approached what appeared to be the exit from the forest simulation. A deep chasm blocked their path, with only a narrow, unstable-looking bridge spanning the gap. The bridge was clearly designed to support only one person at a time, and it swayed ominously in the artificial wind. "One at a time," Sarah said immediately. "It's the only way." But Marcus was studying the structure more carefully. The bridge was indeed unstable, but the chasm itself wasn't as formidable as it first appeared. The sides were steep but climbable in places, and he could see handholds that had been carved into the rock face. "There's another way," he said finally. "We don't all have to use the bridge." He explained his plan quickly. The strongest climbers, himself and one of the other rescued cadets, would descend into the chasm and cross at the bottom, then climb up the other side to secure rope lines. The others could then use those lines to cross safely, even if the bridge failed. It was risky, and it would take much longer than simply crossing the bridge individually. But it meant that everyone would make it across, with backup plans in place if anything went wrong. As Marcus rappelled down into the chasm, using improvised equipment, he heard Instructor Veltar's voice in his earpiece. "Interesting choice, Cadet Shun. Why not simply cross the bridge yourself and complete the assessment?" Marcus paused in his descent, looking up at the group of cadets depending on him. "Because that's not what a Pack Alpha does," he replied. "We don't leave anyone behind." The chasm crossing took nearly an hour to complete safely, but when the last cadet reached the far side, Marcus felt a satisfaction unlike anything he had experienced during individual training exercises. They had succeeded not because of his abilities alone, but because they had worked together as a unified group. The exit from the simulation appeared before them, a simple doorway that led back into the Academy's normal corridors. But as they approached, Marcus could see through the transparent observation deck that Alpha 7 was there, waiting. The massive Fenrax was standing at attention, his fur displaying the deep gold coloration that Marcus had learned indicated respect and approval. But, more surprisingly, there were 3 other Fenrax with him, creatures Marcus had never seen before, all displaying the same golden fur pattern. As the group emerged from the simulation chamber, Alpha 7 approached Marcus and repeated the gesture from their first meeting, lowering himself completely to the ground in a position of submission that no other cadet had ever witnessed. But this time, the other 3 Fenrax did the same thing. In the observation deck above, Marcus could see Coalition officials exchanging urgent conversations, their expressions ranging from amazement to concern. Whatever had just happened, he had the feeling it was going to change everything, not just for him, but for humanity's place in the galactic community. Instructor Veltar appeared at his side, all 4 of his obsidian arms folded behind his back. His expression was unreadable, but his voice carried a note of respect that hadn't been there before. "Congratulations, Cadet Shun. You've just passed the most comprehensive leadership assessment in Coalition military history. But more importantly, you've validated Alpha 7's judgment in a way that none of us expected." Marcus looked down at the 4 Fenrax, all still maintaining their submissive positions, and felt the weight of expectations settling on his shoulders once again. Whatever happened next, there was no going back to being just another cadet. The pack had found its alpha, and the galaxy was about to take notice. The emergency council meeting was called for 0600 hours, 3 days after Marcus's unprecedented assessment. As he walked through the Academy's corridors toward the administration complex, he could feel the weight of stares from every cadet and instructor he passed. News of what the Coalition officials were privately calling the Fenrax incident had spread throughout the Academy, and speculation was running rampant. Alpha 7 padded silently beside him, as had become routine, but now the massive Fenrax was joined by his 3 companions. Marcus had learned their designations, Beta 4, Gamma 2, and Delta 9, though he suspected these clinical names didn't reflect their true identities any more than Alpha 7's did. Together, the 4 creatures formed an imposing escort that cleared the hallways of foot traffic wherever they went. "This is unprecedented," came a familiar voice from behind him. Marcus turned to see Instructor Veltar approaching, his 4 arms carrying data tablets, and his obsidian features showing signs of stress. In 800 years of Coalition military history, we have no records of multiple Fenrax simultaneously acknowledging a single individual as pack leader. "What does that mean exactly?" Marcus asked. Despite 3 days of debriefings and meetings, he still felt like he was missing crucial pieces of the puzzle. "It means that you have just become the most strategically important cadet in the galaxy," Veltar replied grimly. and that creates problems none of us are prepared to handle. They reached the administration complex, a towering structure that served as the political and command center for the academy. As they entered the main conference room, Marcus was struck by the sheer number of beings present. Representatives from at least a dozen different species filled the space, their conversations creating a cacophony of clicks, musical tones, and harmonic frequencies that his universal translator struggled to process simultaneously. At the head of the room sat Fleet Admiral Korthak, a massive hegemony commander whose species had founded the original coalition military structure. His 12 eyes regarded Marcus with an intensity that suggested the young human was either a valuable asset or a dangerous threat, possibly both. "Cadet Shun, please take your assigned seat." Admiral Korthak's voice rumbled through the chamber, immediately silencing all other conversations. The 4 Fenracs arranged themselves behind Marcus's chair in a protective formation that hadn't been planned but felt completely natural. "Before we begin," the Admiral continued, "I want to make something absolutely clear. This council is not here to judge Cadet Chin's worthiness for any particular position or advancement. We are here to understand what has happened and determine its implications for coalition military doctrine." A figure near the center of the room stood up, a being Marcus recognized as Chancellor Viridian from the Turellian Intelligence Corps. Her moth-like antennae twitched with apparent agitation as she spoke. "Admiral, with respect, how can we separate the evaluation from the implications? This human cadet has somehow triggered behavioral responses in Fenracs that our xenobiologists didn't even know were possible. We need to understand whether this represents a genuine leadership phenomenon or some kind of biological anomaly." "Chancellor Viridian raises valid concerns," came another voice. This belonged to General Thexmar of the Crothry Defense Force, whose scaled features were set in an expression of deep skepticism. "Humans have been coalition members for less than a decade. Their military traditions are primitive by galactic standards. Their technology is derivative, and their strategic thinking is limited by their single-world perspective. The idea that one of them could represent superior leadership material is, frankly, difficult to accept." Marcus felt his jaw clench at the dismissive tone, but before he could respond, an unexpected voice cut through the tension. "You speak of human limitations, General Thexmar, but do you understand what Cadet Chin accomplished during his assessment?" The speaker was Dr. Yala Keshin, the Academy's chief Fenrac specialist and one of the few beings in the galaxy who had studied the creatures for decades. She was an elderly Valdorian whose crystalline skin had taken on the deep blue coloration that indicated advanced age and wisdom. "Please elaborate, Dr. Keshin," Admiral Korthak said. "The assessment was designed to be impossible," she replied, her musical voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "We placed 7 cadets in genuine distress situations, each requiring immediate intervention to prevent serious injury. The traditional response for any individual, even those with leadership potential, would be to prioritize threats and save as many as possible while accepting some casualties as unavoidable." She paused, looking directly at Marcus. Cadet Chin refused to accept casualties. Instead of thinking like an individual trying to solve multiple problems, he began thinking like a pack leader responsible for every member of his group. He transformed a series of rescue operations into a unified mission with distributed responsibilities and redundant safety measures. "That's commendable," General Thexmar conceded, "but hardly revolutionary. Good officers have been coordinating rescue operations for millennia." "You're missing the point," Dr. Keshin continued. "The Fenrac's response wasn't triggered by his tactical skills or his success rate. It was triggered by something much more fundamental: his absolute refusal to consider any outcome that didn't include the survival and welfare of every individual under his protection." She activated a holographic display that showed footage from the assessment. "Watch their behavior patterns." Alpha 7 began responding to Cadet Chin's decisions before he made them. The Fenracs was anticipating leadership choices that hadn't yet been articulated. That level of behavioral synchronization has never been documented between Fenracs and any other species. Marcus watched the footage with fascination and growing unease. He could see what Dr. Keshen meant. There were moments where Alpha 7 had moved to support his decisions before he had even fully formed them in his own mind. Furthermore, the doctor continued, the arrival of the 3 additional Fenracs represents something we thought was purely theoretical. Fenracs are typically solitary creatures who form temporary partnerships for specific missions. But they retain genetic memories of ancient pack behaviors from before their domestication. What we witnessed was the spontaneous formation of a Fenrax pack with Cadet Shun as the acknowledged alpha. The room fell silent as the implications of this statement sank in. Finally, Admiral Korthax spoke. Dr. Keshen, are you suggesting that this represents some kind of evolutionary throwback? That the Fenrax have reverted to primitive pack behavior? Not reverted, Admiral. Evolved. The pack formation appears to be a response to recognizing leadership qualities that trigger deep genetic programming. It suggests that Cadet Shun possesses traits that the Fenracs identify as optimal for commanding not just their species, but potentially multi-species forces. Chancellor Viridian's antennae were now twitching rapidly with what Marcus had learned indicated extreme agitation. If that's true, then we're not talking about a gifted individual cadet. We're talking about a potential shift in the balance of coalition military leadership. Exactly, came a new voice from the back of the room. Marcus turned to see a figure he didn't recognize, a tall, elegant being whose species was unfamiliar to him, which is why the High Council has decided to implement immediate protective protocols. Admiral Korthax, 12 eyes, all focused on the newcomer with obvious surprise. Ambassador Lixandra, we weren't expecting representation from the High Council. The situation has escalated beyond Academy jurisdiction, Admiral. Cadet Shun is now classified as a strategic asset of the highest priority. Effective immediately, he will be transferred to specialized training at the Coalition Advanced Leadership Institute on Nexus Prime. Marcus found his voice for the first time during the meeting. Excuse me, but shouldn't I have some say in this decision? Ambassador Lixandra's attention turned to him, and Marcus felt like he was being evaluated by an intelligence far beyond anything he had encountered before. Cadet Shun, you're no longer simply a student seeking military training. Whether you realize it or not, you have become a symbol of humanity's potential role in galactic civilization. Your personal preferences, while respected, must be balanced against the greater strategic implications of your abilities. What if I refuse? Marcus asked quietly. The ambassador's expression didn't change, but somehow her next words carried an undertone that suggested refusal wasn't really an option. Then, humanity's advancement in coalition military structure will remain limited to support roles, and you will have wasted what may be the greatest leadership potential discovered in centuries. Instructor Veltar, who had been silent throughout most of the meeting, finally spoke up. Ambassador, with respect, Cadet Shun has completed only 3 weeks of basic academy training. Accelerating his advancement at this stage could be counterproductive, which is why he will be accompanied by a full support staff, including specialists from each major coalition species, the ambassador replied. He will not be advancing alone. In fact, we are implementing a new program specifically designed around his demonstrated capabilities. She activated another holographic display, this one showing organizational charts and training protocols that Marcus couldn't fully understand. The Coalition Multi-Species Leadership Development Program will train Cadet Shun alongside carefully selected individuals from other species who have shown exceptional potential. The goal is to develop a new model of integrated military command. Marcus looked down at Alpha 7, who was watching the proceedings with obvious understanding. The Fenrax's fur had shifted to a deep purple coloration that Marcus had learned indicated concern or uncertainty. What about them? Marcus asked, gesturing toward the 4 Fenrax. If I transfer to Nexus Prime, what happens to the pack? They accompany you? Naturally, Ambassador Lixander said. The pack bond appears to be permanent, and separating you would likely cause significant psychological distress for all parties involved. Marcus thought about Sarah, Kira, Zethkar, and the other cadets he had begun to consider friends. And my classmates from the assessment, the ones who were part of the group rescue. For the first time, the ambassador showed something that might have been approval. An excellent question, and one that demonstrates the kind of thinking we hope to develop. Yes, your assessment group will be included in the new program. Their successful integration under your leadership suggests they represent valuable components of your command structure. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, covering logistics, security protocols, and training schedules that would reshape not just Marcus's future, but potentially the entire structure of coalition military leadership. As the various representatives filed out of the chamber, Marcus remained seated, trying to process everything that had just happened. Admiral Korthak approached him as the room emptied. Cadet Shun, I want you to understand something. What you're being offered is an extraordinary opportunity, but it also comes with extraordinary risks. If you succeed, you could help reshape galactic military doctrine and elevate humanity's status throughout the coalition. If you fail, you could set back human advancement for generations. Marcus looked up at the massive admiral, feeling the weight of responsibility settling even more heavily on his shoulders. Admiral, 3 weeks ago, I was just a kid from Earth who wanted to serve in the military. Now apparently I'm supposed to become some kind of galactic military revolutionary. How am I supposed to know if I'm ready for something like this? The Admiral's 12 eyes regarded him thoughtfully. Cadet, in my experience, the beings who are truly ready for great responsibility are usually the ones who question their own readiness. Your uncertainty may be your greatest qualification. As Admiral Korthak left the chamber, Marcus found himself alone with the 4 Fenrax and Instructor Veltar. Alpha 7 approached and gently nudged his hand, the creature's fur shifting to the supportive gold coloration that had become so familiar. What do you think? Marcus asked quietly, not sure if he was addressing Veltar or the Fenrax. I think, Veltar replied, that you are about to embark on a journey that will test everything you believe about yourself and your species. But I also think that if anyone can navigate such challenges successfully, it might be someone who refuses to leave anyone behind. Marcus stood up slowly, feeling the symbolic weight of the moment. In accepting the transfer to Nexus Prime, he would be leaving behind the familiar structure of Academy life and entering a realm of galactic politics and military strategy that he barely understood. But as he looked at the 4 Fenrax watching him with absolute trust and loyalty, he realized that he had already moved beyond the point where retreat was possible. The pack had chosen him, and now he had to prove worthy of that choice. The boy from Earth was gone. In his place stood someone who would need to become something entirely new, a leader who could bridge the gaps between species, cultures, and ways of thinking that had never been successfully integrated before. The only question now was whether he was strong enough to become what the galaxy needed him to be. 6 months had passed since Marcus Chun arrived at the Coalition Advanced Leadership Institute on Nexus Prime, and the transformation had been more dramatic than anyone could have predicted. The institute itself was a marvel of galactic engineering, built into the surface of a moon that orbited a binary star system, creating perpetual twilight conditions that somehow felt both alien and strangely peaceful. Marcus stood in the central command center of the Institute's main training complex, surrounded by holographic displays showing tactical scenarios from across Coalition space. But these weren't the simple exercises he had grown accustomed to at the Academy. These were real-time crisis situations that required immediate command decisions with genuine consequences. Commander Chun, we have an emergency transmission from the Outer Rim, announced Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, who now served as his communications officer. Her promotion from cadet to lieutenant had been part of the accelerated advancement program that had affected all members of Marcus's original assessment group. Put it through, Marcus replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had developed over months of intensive training. Around him, his integrated command team moved with practiced efficiency. Kira Thane analyzing intelligence data, Zethkar coordinating tactical responses, and representatives from 6 other species managing their specialized areas of expertise. The holographic display activated to show Admiral Korthak's familiar 12-eyed visage, but the hegemony commander's usual composure was clearly strained. Commander Chun, we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. A coalition exploration vessel has been stranded in the Kepler 1649 system after encountering what appears to be a hostile alien species previously unknown to our databases. Marcus felt the familiar sensation of Alpha 7's presence behind him as the Fenrax moved closer to the command console. Over the past months, Marcus had learned to interpret the subtle changes in the creature's behavior as indicators of tactical situations. Right now, Alpha 7's fur was displaying the deep blue pattern that indicated high-stakes decision-making. "What's the tactical situation, Admiral?" Marcus asked, already calling up star charts and deployment options on his personal display. The exploration vessel Harmony's Edge was conducting routine surveys when they encountered ships of unknown configuration. First contact protocols were initiated, but something went wrong during the communication attempt. The aliens responded with what appears to be an attack, disabling the Harmony's Edge and stranding the crew. Kira looked up from her intelligence console. "Commander, I'm reading massive energy signatures from that system. Whatever technology these aliens are using, it's unlike anything in our databases." How many crew members?" Marcus asked. 237 beings from 12 different species, Admiral Korthak replied, including Ambassador Lixandra, who was conducting diplomatic evaluations of newly discovered worlds. Marcus felt the weight of that information settle in his chest. Ambassador Lixandra had become something of a mentor during his time at the Institute, helping him navigate the complex political implications of his unique position. The thought of her stranded and possibly under attack activated something protective and fierce in his response. "What forces do we have available for rescue operations?" he asked. "That's the complication," Admiral Korthak said grimly. "The nearest coalition fleet is 4 days away at maximum hyperspace velocity. Long-range scans suggest the hostile aliens have multiple ships in the system and are actively pursuing the disabled exploration vessel." Marcus studied the tactical data flowing across his screens. 4 days was too long. If the aliens were indeed hostile, the crew of the Harmony's Edge might not survive that long. But what alternative did they have? "Admiral, what about the advanced training squadron here at the Institute?" There was a long pause before Admiral Korthak responded. "Commander Chun, the training squadron consists of experimental vessels with partially tested technology and crews made up entirely of advanced students. Deploying them against unknown alien forces would be unprecedented and risky," Marcus finished. "But possibly our only option if we want to save those lives." Behind him, Marcus sensed movement from the 4 Fenrax who had become permanent fixtures in his command center. Alpha 7, Beta 4, Gamma 2, and Delta 9 had arranged themselves in a formation that Marcus had learned indicated readiness for complex pack tactics. "Sir," came Zethkar's voice from the tactical station, "I'm showing 12 vessels in the training squadron, each with advanced shielding and weapon systems. If we coordinate properly, there should be sufficient firepower to engage unknown forces." "The question is coordination," Kira added. "These aren't established crews with years of experience working together. Most of the command staff graduated from advanced programs only weeks ago." Marcus looked around his command center, seeing the faces of beings from nearly a dozen different species, all looking to him for leadership in a situation that had no established protocols. This was exactly the kind of scenario the Institute had been preparing them for, the moment when theoretical training had to become real-world command decisions. "Admiral, I'm requesting authorization to deploy the training squadron on a rescue mission," Marcus said formally. "Commander, you understand that this would be your first independent command mission? Are you confident that your integrated crew can handle combat operations against unknown hostile forces?" Marcus looked at Alpha 7, whose fur had shifted to the determined silver coloration that indicated absolute certainty. "Admiral, 6 months ago you told me that leadership was about taking responsibility for impossible situations. I can't guarantee we'll succeed, but I can guarantee that we won't abandon Coalition personnel to hostile forces when we have the capability to help. Another long pause. Then, authorization granted, Commander Chun. But understand that this mission will be closely monitored by High Command. If you succeed, it will validate everything we've invested in the new multi-species leadership program. If you fail, we won't fail, sir, Marcus said with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. The next 6 hours were a whirlwind of preparation and deployment. The training squadron consisted of 12 vessels of the new Harmony-class design, ships specifically built to accommodate mixed-species crews and integrated command structures. Each ship carried a crew of 36 beings from various coalition species, all trained in the new collaborative protocols that Marcus and his team had been developing. As Marcus took his position on the command bridge of the squadron flagship Nexus Unity, he was struck by how different this felt from the simulated exercises they had been running. The bridge crew moved with nervous energy, and he could sense the weight of genuine responsibility settling on everyone's shoulders. All ships reporting ready for departure, Sarah announced from the communications station. Fenrax Alpha 7 requesting permission to join bridge crew, came an unexpected voice. Marcus turned to see that Alpha 7 had learned to use the ship's communication system, something that shouldn't have been possible according to Fenrax behavioral studies. Permission granted, Marcus replied, though he wondered what the creature's enhanced presence on the bridge might indicate. The hyperspace jump to Kepler 1649 took 18 hours, faster than any coalition vessel had previously managed, thanks to the experimental drive systems installed in the Harmony-class ships. During the journey, Marcus worked with his squadron commanders to develop tactical plans for multiple scenarios, from simple rescue operations to full-scale combat engagements. When they emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 1649 system, the situation was immediately clear and far more complex than the initial reports had suggested. Commander, I'm reading 15 alien vessels of unknown configuration surrounding the disabled coalition ship, reported Lieutenant Commander Vextar from his position at the tactical console. The Crothery had requested transfer to Marcus's command after witnessing the human's leadership capabilities, setting aside his initial skepticism about human potential. The alien ships are approximately twice the size of our vessels, added Dr. Senecole, a Valdorian scientist who served as the squadron's technology specialist. Their energy signatures suggest power sources that operate on principles we don't understand. Marcus studied the tactical display, noting the positions and movement patterns of the unknown ships. They had formed a perfect sphere around the Harmony's edge, maintaining equal distances and synchronized movements that suggested either advanced coordination or hive mind behavior. Open a communications channel on all known frequencies, Marcus ordered. Let's see if we can establish dialogue before assuming hostile intent. Sarah's hands moved over her console with practiced efficiency. Channel open, all frequencies broadcasting. Unknown vessels. This is Commander Marcus Chun of the Coalition Advanced Training Squadron. We are responding to a distress call from the exploration vessel Harmony's Edge. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions. For several minutes, there was no response. Then, the communication system activated with a sound unlike anything Marcus had ever heard, a harmonious combination of musical tones and mathematical patterns that seemed to convey complex information even through the universal translator. Coalition vessels, you have entered the territory of the Symphonic Collective. Your damaged ship violated our sacred resonance zones and disrupted harmonic patterns that took millennia to establish. We require reparation for this transgression. Marcus exchanged glances with his bridge crew. This wasn't the aggressive first contact scenario they had prepared for, but rather some kind of territorial dispute based on concepts they didn't understand. Symphonic Collective, we apologize for any unintended disruption caused by our vessel. The Harmony's Edge was conducting peaceful exploration and had no knowledge of your territorial claims. We request permission to retrieve our damaged ship and crew, and we would welcome the opportunity to discuss proper protocols for future encounters. Another pause, then, Coalition Commander, Your ship formations and approach vectors demonstrate aggressive tactical positioning. We cannot permit retrieval operations while you maintain hostile configurations. Marcus looked at his tactical display and realized the problem. The 12 ships of his squadron had automatically arranged themselves in standard coalition military formation, optimized for mutual defense and coordinated attacks. To a species that communicated through harmonic patterns and valued symmetry, their positioning probably looked like preparation for assault. All squadron vessels. This is Commander Chun. Reconfigure to Exploration Formation Pattern 7. I want maximum separation between ships and no overlapping fields of fire. Sir, Vextar protested. That will leave us vulnerable if they decide to attack. It will also demonstrate peaceful intent, Marcus replied. Sometimes leadership means taking calculated risks. As the squadron ships repositioned themselves according to his orders, Marcus noticed Alpha 7's fur shifting through a complex pattern of colors he had never seen before. The Fenrax was responding to something in the situation that Marcus couldn't quite identify. Symphonic Collective, we have reconfigured our formation to demonstrate peaceful intent. We request permission to approach the damaged vessel and begin rescue operations. This time the response came more quickly. Coalition Commander, your formation demonstrates understanding of harmonic principles. However, we require assurance that future coalition activities will respect our territorial resonance patterns. Marcus realized they were being offered an opportunity to establish formal first contact protocols with an entirely new species, something that could have profound implications for coalition expansion into this region of space. Symphonic Collective, I am authorized to negotiate preliminary territorial agreements on behalf of the coalition. Would you be willing to establish formal diplomatic contact while we conduct rescue operations? This proposition has harmonic resonance. We will permit approach of one coalition vessel while others maintain protective formation at current distance. Diplomatic contact will be initiated simultaneously with rescue operations. Over the next 8 hours, Marcus found himself conducting two of the most important operations of his young career simultaneously. While his technical teams worked with the crew of the Harmony's Edge to repair their damaged systems, he engaged in complex negotiations with representatives of the Symphonic Collective to establish the first formal territorial agreement between the Coalition and an entirely new species. The aliens, as it turned out, were not hostile, but rather extremely protective of what they called resonance zones, areas of space where they had spent centuries creating complex harmonic patterns that served both religious and technological purposes. The Harmony's Edge had unknowingly disrupted one of these patterns with their standard exploration protocols. Commander Chun, came Ambassador Lixandra's voice over the communication system as the repairs near completion. I want you to know that what you've accomplished here goes far beyond a simple rescue mission. You've potentially opened an entire new region of space for coalition exploration while establishing peaceful contact with a species that could have become a significant threat. Marcus looked around his bridge, seeing the exhausted but satisfied faces of his multi-species crew. They had worked together with a level of coordination and mutual trust that would have been impossible under traditional coalition command structures. Ambassador, I think we've proven that the new integrated command protocols can handle real-world crises, Marcus replied. But, more importantly, we've shown that sometimes the best military solution is to avoid military action altogether. As the squadron prepared for the return journey to Nexus Prime, with the Harmony's Edge safely in tow and a formal diplomatic agreement with the Symphonic Collective secured, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that first day at the Academy when Alpha 7 had declared him Pack Alpha. He was no longer the uncertain cadet who had wondered whether he deserved the Fenrax's recognition. Through months of intensive training and now this first independent command, he had learned to trust not just his own judgment, but the collective wisdom of the diverse beings who had chosen to follow his leadership. Alpha 7 approached his command chair and settled into the position that had become routine during complex operations. The Fenrax's fur was displaying the deep gold pattern that indicated satisfaction and pride, but There was something else in the creature's posture that suggested this mission had been more than just a successful rescue operation. "What is it?" Marcus asked quietly. Alpha 7's response came not through words, but through the complex body language that Marcus had learned to interpret over their months together. The Fenrax was indicating that the pack had evolved beyond just the 4 original creatures. It now included the entire multi-species crew that had learned to function as a unified team under Marcus's leadership. Looking around the bridge at beings from a dozen different worlds who had successfully completed their first joint mission, Marcus realized that Alpha 7 was right. They had become something new, not just a coalition squadron, but a true interspecies pack with a shared purpose and mutual loyalty that transcended traditional military hierarchies. The experiment in multi-species leadership had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, and Marcus Chun, the human cadet who had once wondered if he belonged in a galactic military academy, had become exactly what the galaxy needed: a leader who could bring together different species, cultures, and ways of thinking into something stronger than any of them could be alone. As the squadron entered hyperspace for the journey home, Marcus allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The pack had found its purpose, and the pack had proven itself worthy of the trust that had been placed in it. The boy from Earth was truly gone now, replaced by something far more significant: a leader whose influence would help shape the future of galactic civilization itself.